Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're all doing well and in good health, inshallah. My name is Khadija Bnadi, and today I'm going to talk about the TPR, or the Total Physical Response Method. So, before again we go in details with this method, let's revise or review the methods that were developed before the TPR method. So, the first method we said was the grammar translation method that focuses on reading, writing, and translation. It teaches grammar deductively, and we move to talk about the direct method. We said that it focuses on oral proficiency. It teaches grammar inductively, and then the oral approach and situational language teaching in Britain, and the audiolingualism in the United States, and after the audiolingualism, the silent way, in which the teacher keeps silent as much as possible, and the student must talk more than the teacher. Then the TPR came, or the Total Physical Response Method came. So now we move. I just want to mention something before we move to the background of this method. It's very important for us to understand or to know the order of these methods, in order to know the reasons or the reason of establishment of each method, and for not to be confused. Okay. Now we move to the background. TPR, or Total Physical Response, is a language teaching method built around the coordination of speech and action. So, which means that the teacher here uses speech, okay, and actions in order to teach the language. It attempts to teach language through physical or motor activity. That's why it is called Total Physical Response. It was developed by James Asher. James Asher is the one who developed this method. It draws in several traditions, like developmental psychology, learning theory, humanistic pedagogy, and we're going to see what it shares with this humanistic psychology or pedagogy, and language teaching procedures proposed by Harold and Palmer. When we say Palmer here, we are talking about the oral approach to situational language teaching. So it takes from some of its procedures. Okay. He claims, here we're talking about James Asher, who developed TPR. He claims that speech directed to young children consists of commands which they respond to physically before they begin to produce verbal responses. So what does this mean? It means that here in this sentence we see his argument. Okay, so the way in which way children acquire their first language, they acquire their first language when their parents, for example, or adults speak to them, and their speech consists of commands. For example, when a parent says to a child, "Bring me that book," or "Give me something," or "Take this one," or it consists of commands which they respond to physically. So the children here, when they hear or listen to the speech of their parents or adults, they are going to respond to it physically before they can speak. Okay, they for example, when a parent says to his child, "Bring me that book," the child is going, before he can speak, the child is going to go and bring the book and give it to his parent. Okay, so, and we notice this in our life, that children in their early ages, they can understand, they have that listening competence, and they can understand what you say to them, and can respond to it physically before they can even speak. Okay, so this is his argument, and he feels that adults should recapitulate the process by which children acquire their native language, which means that the way in which children acquire their native language, adults who want to learn a second language or a foreign language, they can learn it or acquire it in the same process. Like, for example, the teacher speaks to his students and gives them commands, and students, they, before they begin to speak, they understand and they respond to it physically. So this is what the TPR method is about. He shares with humanistic psychology the role of affective factors in language learning. And we know, so this is what it shares with humanistic psychology, the role of affective factors. And what we mean by affective factors in language learning is the feelings and the emotional reactions that a learner has toward the language that he learns or she learns. We are talking here about anxiety, motivation, self-esteem, attitude, etc. Now we move to the approach, and the approach, as we all know, it consists of theory of language and theory of language learning. So what is the theory of language of the TPR? So TPR classroom drills seem to be built on assumptions that owe much to structuralist or grammar-based views of language. So the TPR has a structuralist view of language. Asher states that most of the grammatical structure of the target language and hundreds of vocabulary items can be learned from the skillful use of the imperative by the instructor. Which means that when the teacher teaches the grammatical structure, teaches the grammar or the vocabulary, he teaches those items using the imperative, and we are going to see this in the procedure, how the teacher uses this imperative to teach students. Now we move to the theory of language learning. Asher's language learning theories are reminiscent of the views of other behavioral psychologists, stimulus response view. So this the TPR method has a behaviorist view of language learning. Okay, but Asher elaborated the three influential learning hypotheses that facilitate foreign language learning, which are the BIO program and the brain lateralization and stress. Okay, so the first learning hypothesis is BIO program, and they summarize it in this way. So children learn or acquire their first language through three processes. The first process is that children develop listening competence first. They develop the listening competence and understanding. Second, they are required to respond physically. So when they listen, after that they can respond to the speech of adults physically before they can speak. And after that, the third process, speech evolves naturally and effortlessly. So after those processes, the development of listening competence and then the ability to respond physically, then speech can come later, or speech comes later. And Asher says that the foreign language learning processes parallel to first language learning processes. So if we want to learn a foreign language, we can learn it in the way in which we learned or acquired our first language or our mother tongue. Okay, now we move to the second hypothesis, which is brain lateralization. So most of the second language teaching methods are directed to left brain hemisphere, but TPR directed to right brain hemisphere. Right hemisphere activities must occur before left hemisphere can process language for production. What does this mean? It means that most of the methods, like the methods that we have already seen, they are directed to left brain hemisphere. Means that the teacher tries to make the students produce the language or use the language as much as possible. But in this method, the TPR, it is right brain directed to right brain hemisphere. So in this method, the right brain hemisphere activities must occur before left hemisphere can process language for production. So here it means that there must be a mastery of right hemisphere motor activities, which means that when we say right hemisphere, we're talking about the competence, and the left brain hemisphere, we're talking about production or performance. So before the students or learners can perform or can produce the language, they should develop that competence first, like listening competence. Okay, and then so after the left brain, the left hemisphere watches and learns and takes a sufficient amount of learning, then it will, I'm talking about the left hemisphere, then it will be triggered to produce language and perform it. So in this method, we don't really focus on the production of the language by the students, but the first thing is that they should first develop the listening competence, and then they can produce the language. I hope this idea is clear. The third learning hypothesis is stress. So absence of stress is an important condition for successful language learning, and as we know, while acquiring our first language or in the first language learning, there is a free environment of stress. There is no stress in acquiring our mother tongue. However, in the second language acquisition, there is some kind of stress and anxiety. But in order for learners to learn their second language or foreign language, they should be liberated from stressful situations. And Crashen also mentioned this, if you remember, in the previous semester, in the learning theories. We talked about Crashen talk in his Crashen's model. Do you remember this? He talked about stress, and that in order to learn, there should be a lower level of anxiety and stress. So now we move to the design, and design, as we all know, consists of objective, syllabus, types of learning and teaching activities, learner rule, teacher rule, and the rule of instructional material. So concerning the objective of this method is to teach oral proficiency, teach basic speaking skills, but in which way? Through the use of action-based drills in the imperative forms. So the objective is to teach oral proficiency and speaking skills, but through the use of actions and imperative forms. Syllabus. The type of syllabus Asher uses can be inferred from an analysis of the exercise types employed in TPR classes. This analysis reveals the use of a sentence-based syllabus with grammatical and lexical criteria being primary in selecting teaching items, which means that in order for us, in order to see which type of syllabus that is used in the TPR, we should first analyze there should be an analysis of the exercises that were used, and from the analysis it was discovered that the type of syllabus that was used is the sentence-based syllabus, which focuses on grammar and vocabulary. Total physical response requires initial attention to meaning rather than to the form of the items. So both vocabulary and grammar are important, but most importance goes to the meaning or the vocabulary. And grammar is thus taught inductively. Okay. Learning and teaching activities. Imperative. So those are the activities that are used in the TPR method. So there is the imperative drill, conversational dialogues, and other class activities include role plays and slide presentations. And reading and writing activities may also be employed to further consolidate structures and vocabulary. So the most important activities that are used in the TPR are the imperative drills and conversational dialogues, but there can also be some use of reading and writing activities. Learner role. So the learner in this method is a listener and performer, which means they listen and respond physically to the teacher's commands. They listen and then they perform physically to the teacher's commands. Learners are required to respond both individually and collectively together. Learners have little influence over the content of learning, and they monitor and evaluate their own progress. Teacher role. The teacher has an active and direct role. He decides what to teach, models and presents the new materials, selects supporting materials, and provides the best kind of exposure. And concerning the feedback, so the teacher is very active in this method. He decides approximately everything, but concerning the feedback, he shouldn't interrupt to correct errors. So for students to learn, it would be better if the teacher doesn't interrupt them and correct their mistakes, as parents do when their children make mistakes. They don't really focus on mistakes and correct them unless if there is a very a mistake that is really a big mistake. A rule of instructional material. There is no basic text in this method. Okay, there is no basic textbook or curriculum in this method, so the teacher's voice, actions and gestures are sufficient. So at early stages, only the teacher's voice is enough, and actions and gestures are enough. But at a later stage, he can use some objects in the classroom, like books, pens, cups, whatever is present in the classroom. And later, he can use pictures and slides. So in this method, there is no basic text in this method. Now we are done with the design. We are going to move to the procedure. So Asher provides a lesson-by-lesson account for a course taught according to TPR principles, which serves as a source of information on the procedures used in the TPR classroom. The course was for adult immigrants and consisted of 159 hours of classroom instruction. The sixth class in the course proceeded in the following way. So this is an example of how the teaching happens in the classroom. So there is first a review. This was a fast-moving warm-up in which individual students were moved with commands such as, for example, the teacher says, Pablo, drive your car around Miyako and honk your horn. Jiffy, throw the red flower to Maria, and Jiffy is going to do that. Maria, scream. Rita, pick up the knife and spoon and put them in the cup. Eduardo, take a drink of water and give the cup to Ellen. So after when the teacher says or gives a command to a student, the student is going to apply or going to do that or to respond to it physically. There is no need of speaking at early stages, but just to understand and respond to the teacher's commands physically. New commands, these verbs were introduced. Wash your hands. So if the teacher wants to teach this verb, is going um, to use also other vocabulary like this: wash your hands, wash your face, wash your hair, wash the cup. And when the student applies or responds to the teacher's commands physically, the student the teacher will in this way the teacher tests the student's understanding and will see if the students really understood or not. Brush your teeth, brush your pants, brush the table. So this is an example. The teacher gives commands to students and students apply that. This is what we mean by imperative form. Conclusion: TPR enjoyed some popularity in 1970s to 1980s because of its support, like Crashen, who emphasized also on comprehensible input and reduction of stress as keys to successful language acquisition. Asher stressed that TPR should be used in association with other methods and techniques. So this method, as you can see, enjoyed some popularity at that time, at that period, because of the support that it saw. As I mentioned, Crashen emphasized also on comprehensible input and reduction of stress, and this what gave to the TPR method that popularity at that time. But Asher also he mentioned that TPR should be used in association with other methods and techniques. Like this method TPR can be used with another method or another technique. So that's all for this presentation today. I hope it was clear and helpful and useful. If you have any questions or just put them in the comments. And thank you so much for your listening and your attention, and goodbye.